Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, September 16th, 2023. I apologize that I haven't been uploading in a little bit. I am saying this so I force myself to create more videos for you guys. I've been busy with the first beginning 2 weeks of the academic year, but I promise you that there is a lot I want to discuss. I have about 8 videos planned out for this week, but some that have a pretty interesting take on some elections. So we will be diving into that. Today's take is not a hot take. It is one that pretty much says that Donald Trump will be the 2024 GOP nominee, but today he stands at the highest point ever throughout the entire campaign season, and it looks like that lead might only grow. Now, on your screen right now is the recent polls on Real Clear Politics. They do a good job at compiling all the polls in a timely manner, and we can see here that there's a lot of Trump and Biden all on the same stage. And that's because they are likely to run against each other. We've known this, and we see that there is going to be this rematch dynamic that is making the election a lot closer than we otherwise might have thought. But today's video, again, is about the Republican nomination, not so much about the general election, though, of course, we will dive into it. But with this lead of Donald Trump with being up 44 points nationwide marks the highest ever lead for the president, former president, throughout, again, the entire campaign season, which tells us this thing is practically a done deal. I've been saying it for a while now that Donald Trump's lead has been insurmountable for candidates like Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence. They were never going to be that guy. They were never going to be the one that ended up defeating Donald Trump in this head-to-head matchup, but Ron DeSantis certainly got a lot closer than anyone could have ever imagined. Looking at those numbers back in January and February on 538, even on the ones on Real Clear Politics, we can see that the lead was, in fact, narrowed down for a brief period of time. But of course, that 13-point advantage that Donald Trump had earlier on this year has turned into a 43-point advantage nationwide. So, with Donald Trump at roughly 57% of the electorate, there is no indication that the tides are turning away from him. Even after he skipped the first presidential debate, it looks like voters are even more set on Donald Trump being their nominee. And that's fascinating because Donald Trump started out being someone who many people expected would need a saving grace. And while he did always have this lead following the 2022 midterm elections, announcing in November of 2022 after cataclysmic defeats for the nationwide GOP, Republicans on the Trump side were worried. They were worried that Donald Trump was only going to start to lose to candidates like Ron DeSantis. As Ron DeSantis narrowed closer, it became more interesting in the fact that the race was going to be competitive. But then Donald Trump learned what he had to do. He went on full offense against Ron DeSantis, gave him the nickname Ron DeSanctimonious, went after him point after point after point. And while Ron DeSantis was never in the race by the time Donald Trump announced in November, all the way up until April of 2023, those entire near half-year period, the months that had gone on, Donald Trump was able to go after Ron DeSantis in an exceptionally powerful way. He was able to tank his numbers, and thus today Ron DeSantis stands at 12.7%. We are reaching a point where it is only getting worse for Donald Trump's opponents, which means some of them will eventually drop out. Francis Suarez recently dropped out of the presidential race after not qualifying for the first debate, and the new polls seem to indicate that both Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, and Doug Burgum, the former governor of North Dakota, or actually current governor right now, neither of them, Larry Elder included, will make qualifications for the upcoming debate at the end of September. They need more donors, which they have, but they need higher polling numbers. They need 3% in early states or 3% nationwide, and neither of them seem to be getting that in any type of regard. Now, I will say you'd be surprised at what can change in the next 2 weeks, that maybe there will be some bumping up for them. But for the rest of these candidates, we're probably going to see yet again another presidential debate where Donald Trump does not participate, but with the candidates facing off against each other and there being minimal to no movement in national polls. Now, the interesting thing about this Republican primary process is that amongst Republicans, both Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are similarly viewed. They're viewed in a way that is positive. An overwhelming, substantial majority of the Republican Party says that they like them as people, but Donald Trump almost always gets the first preference over Ron DeSantis. And that's a problem for the DeSantis campaign because if Donald Trump was taken out of the equation, Ron DeSantis would easily be at similar numbers. Combining their forces, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump would also be an unstoppable force in this primary process if they were unified amongst one candidate. But of course, Donald Trump has all the leverage here. He is going to be the GOP nominee as it stands today. And if you're looking at a lot of the new statewide polls that have come out, for example, in the state of Michigan, for instance, you find that Donald Trump is up by 47 points. 47 points is so significant, and we know that, right? 47 points is an advantage that no one ever talks about because this is just, quite frankly, an end game here. This is as if the primary is tomorrow, and there is no way that, Ron DeSantis is getting up to this point. And it's also a 47-point advantage means that there isn't much of a story here. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. That is the narrative that has been played by the media. It's the correct one, and it is one that is going to come to fruition, halting any, major impacts or injunctions by the court system or any type of, unrelated circumstances and unexpected circumstances surrounding the primary. Right now, Donald Trump being up 47 points isn't news. So when you see a poll out from Susquehanna University that says Donald Trump's up by 47 points in Michigan, you believe it because you know it to be true because it's happening all across the country. We take a look also at South Carolina. This is quite an interesting one. You see that he's up 28 points in this primary. Why does that matter? Well, there are two candidates on this on the debate stage that you remember, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, that are both from South Carolina, the former governor and the incumbent senator representing the state in Washington, D.C., both of them losing to Donald Trump, even their combined forces losing again to President Trump. You see here that Nikki Haley's at 18%, Donald Trump is at 46%. Senator Tim Scott is at 10%. Again, Donald Trump is at 46%. You continue to see in Iowa, Donald Trump is up 35%. You look at the other state polls. California, Trump is up by 39%. And we continue. Let's keep taking a look. You take a look at Mississippi, Donald Trump up by 39%, right? Georgia, Trump up by 42%. Virginia, Trump up by 34%. Even Utah, a state that very much was upset with Donald Trump's nomination in the 2016 election. Utah has Donald Trump up 8 points across the state. So all around, this advantage is continuing to grow. It's even permeating into some of the states that are of the most important ones when it comes down to the GOP primary process. Some of the larger delegate states like Michigan, like California, states that will dictate the direction of this GOP primary. And just taking a look at where we are in terms of Trump polling nationwide, I already showed you that he's up 43 points, but we can see that of the states that have polls of Trump and DeSantis, or just Donald Trump being on that ballot amongst many other candidates, he's leading in every single state. There's not a singular one where Donald Trump is losing. That's also very out of the ordinary for what should be a competitive nomination process. I mean, we can even see that back in 2016, Donald Trump today, 8 years ago today, was up by just up by 10.5%. He eventually won with roughly a 19.5% advantage. But when we take a look at this map, let's see here who was winning. Donald Trump in a bunch of states, sure, but still lost a bunch. Lost Ohio, a very populous state. Lost Texas, the second most populous state. Lost Minnesota, lost Wisconsin, lost Iowa, for crying out loud. Lost Colorado, right? Lost Alaska. That's a state that's becoming a very interesting point for Republicans in future elections. So you see that, sure, Donald Trump had a lead in 2016, but it wasn't enough that he was able to win every single state. And that is the problem for Republicans now, that they can't reverse it from where it was in 2016. They are, in fact, losing every single state. Ron DeSantis is, in fact, losing every single state. And Donald Trump, in this point, is leading in a bunch of states that matters. And so when we see these numbers, and we are seeing Pennsylvania at 48, Michigan at 61, Kentucky at 69, Texas at 60, California at 54, the only reasonable conclusion here is that Donald Trump ends up winning this nomination very, very easily. Now, the national forecast gets a bit more grim for the GOP. You can see, not the GOP, for candidates that aren't Donald Trump. He's expected to get roughly 90 to 95% of the national delegate count. Ron DeSantis can't even crack 100 according to Race to the White House in their projected vote overall. That is a fundamental problem. And again, it used to be closer, right? We remember these numbers had these candidates in a much more competitive position. Today, that simply doesn't stand. And in terms of who people think is going to be the GOP nominee, on the Democratic side, Joe Biden is at 67 cents for a yes share. Donald Trump is at 70 cents. There is more confidence that Donald Trump will be the GOP nominee than Joe Biden, according to the betting markets, as the incumbent president. That is what is crazy about this all, too. For the first time in betting market history, Donald Trump has a greater chance at being the nominee than Joe Biden on the Democratic side. That is the most, super interesting takeaway from this. And although it might be not super out of the ordinary for those who are in support of the former president or who are in a position that's on the ground in Iowa and New Hampshire and is seeing the energy and enthusiasm around him, but standard political convention tells us that this doesn't make the most sense. But again, our realities are becoming stranger and stranger all the time. So looking at where we are in terms of our national nomination process, Joe Biden is going to be the nominee. Donald Trump evidently is going to be the Republican nominee. And again, we are in for a rematch. These national polls show that Donald Trump has a 0.5% advantage. This is a good place to be. If I was President Trump, this is exactly where I would want to be. Now, Joe Biden still narrowly edges out Donald Trump in terms of a chance at victory. We can see that on the betting markets too on Predict It, though. The confidence in Democrats is a lot higher than what national surveys might suggest they should be. Right now, Democrats at 58 cents for a share, Republicans at just 45. But statewide polling seems to indicate closer races, but still leads for Joe Biden. Maybe leads that we don't necessarily see on the national level. It's very interesting, though, because right now Joe Biden is up by 1.5 in Michigan, but is down nationwide. For context, the nation voted for Joe Biden by 4.5 in 2020, Michigan only by 2.8. And it isn't just here. That provides us an interesting look at some of the statewide polls. We can also see that in the general election in states such as Pennsylvania, let's see if we can find it. I'm going to go ahead and sort by election polls. Then we can go ahead and just scroll through, see if we find anything. Of course, it's going to be focusing up on the nomination process. But when we look at some of the more competitive states, we find that Joe Biden still maintains a lead, right? Winning by New Mexico in 8 points, winning in Virginia by 9 points, winning in Pennsylvania by 2 points. Some reductions, some growth, but generally speaking, a lot better, surprisingly enough, than what we see on the national level. Now, that's also why I don't necessarily trust these polls this far out from the election. This is not where we should be making our bets based off of national survey data today, but it does seem to suggest also a decrease in enthusiasm surrounding the election. A lot more undecided voters than what we saw in the 2020 election. By the time we reached election day, roughly 4 to 5% of America was undecided. Today, that's about 10%, even though everybody has already seen these candidates, in many cases voted in an election involving these candidates. Election turnout in 2020 was 67%, the highest we've ever seen since the 1900 election, not just in the 1900s, but literally the 1900 election. The year 1900 was the last time we saw election turnout that high. It had been 120 years. So to see this many undecided voters tells us that there is a considerable portion of the electorate that is still disillusioned with the election process, disillusioned with who the options are. And that is largely because both sides of the aisle are very, very firm that they want their respective nominees to be President Trump. On the Republican side, we can see the GOP primary polls. Donald Trump takes the lead. The Democratic side, Joe Biden also very much in an advantage point, 54.8% over his closest opponents, in a very similar fashion, similar to what we've been seeing with President Trump nationwide. But this super high advantage, again, being in a better position to the betting odds than President Biden in the Democratic primary is so fascinating. This advantage is about to rival President Biden's on the Democratic side, even though Donald Trump is running against 11 other candidates. That is also what is so fascinating about this all, is that so many people have thrown their hat into a ring where they simply have never been able to win. I mean, that's the thing about this all too. They know that they are fighting for that VP spot, but it's very, very interesting too. So looking at the 2024 process, my main takeaway is that it might be boring compared to 2020. It sucks to say, but we've made so many videos talking about how Donald Trump keeps expanding his lead, and I don't even know if he's reached a ceiling yet. This is a new campaign record, though. There have been times where Donald Trump has grown and then dwindled slightly, grown and then dwindled slightly, grown and then dwindled, and then hovered around the same point. And today he's at, again, 56.6%, 57% nationwide in a field of 12 candidates. We can call it today. The only way I see Donald Trump not being the nominee again is if there's some type of major interference. An interference not necessarily to get rid of Donald Trump, but one involving maybe his involvement surrounding the court system, maybe one involving his indictments, or maybe the RNC tries to pull one under. So looking at a lot of different factors here, most of them arrive us at the same conclusion, that there will be a rematch between the two. There is a possibility, though, that as Republicans start to think about electability, they start to take a look at the swing states, that Joe Biden won in the last election, and they say, holy crap, we might lose if Donald Trump's back on the ballot. Maybe. But because the Republican Party seemingly is so exceptionally infatuated by President Trump, really wants him to be this nominee yet again, I find it to be difficult that there will be any type of interference from anyone on the Republican side, endorsement side, any type of consideration around the 14th Amendment from Republican state secretaries of state or Republican primary election organizers, because the RNC, the DNC, they organize their primaries separately. There is a slim possibility that happens, but I really don't think there will be, because the GOP is so enamored by this former president, they are going to do anything they can to ensure that he wins. That means they're going to donate. That means they're going to turn out to vote. That means they're going to push him forward to that convention process. And it is going to be one that benefits Donald Trump in the primary. The general election is where it starts to get way, way more fascinating than where we are right now. This is an election we can predict out 6 months, 7 months in advance that we could have predicted out, honestly, a year ago, right? We could have said that Donald Trump will likely be the nominee yet again, and that was just the fact of the matter. That was just our reality, and Donald Trump was going to be that candidate. But we will see what happens. Elections do change very, very quickly in American politics, but as it stands today, with Donald Trump marking the highest point ever in his GOP primary process, through nearly a year of running, actually a year and 2 months from now, so over 10 months now, and just still keeping his name in the ring and circulation, Donald Trump is doing way better than I think a lot of other people on the DeSantis campaign and other campaigns would have hoped for, and a lot better than I think many Democrats expected him to. But in some cases, they're happy about that because they know that a rematch is Joe Biden's best chance at victory again in 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server.